Okay, so Pinterest, as I mentioned, is a great place to find references. So as you can see, I just looked up female reference poses, and I'm just going to pick an image. Let's go with, for example, okay, let's go with one of the first ones. Let's go with this. And Pinterest is really great because if you're looking at an image and you like what you kind of like what it is, if you scroll down, there is a lot of images that are very similar or kind of remind the person of like the style. So I really like this pose. I think it's when I at least look for references, I look for something very dynamic. And this is something that is pretty dynamic. It's not very stiff. It's kind of more, it has a little bit of like life and movement to it. Alright, so now that I have imported the photograph into my application, so I'm using Sketchbook here. So I've put the photograph in my application. And what I like to do over here is lower the opacity so that I'm not tracing just the edges. I want to be tracing the shape and the form, and that's how we're going to kind of learn how her body is shaped and how to draw this potentially without using a reference in later stages. So you want to turn down the opacity, turn it down like pretty much like, what is that, like 24%, 25, 30%? Yeah, it should be less than 50. Alright, so now that we have our reference ready, we're gonna draw or trace over it. So you first should start off with the pencil tool. I'll get more into the details of this in later lessons on how to use Sketchbook, but this is just for the sake of tracing. So what you want to do is you want to understand the shape that her body is taking. So for example, with her head, like even though it's not there, you still want to draw it. So you know that her head is like there, her hair, the shape of her hair. And you can obviously like add your own kind of like. So see what I'm doing? I'm not tracing the outline or the edges. I'm tracing the shape. I'm tracing the shape that her body is in. And I'm using the reference as a guideline. So this is just the pencil. Obviously, we're going to make it way more refined when we go over it with line art. So again, look at the shapes that you're drawing. I know I can see a very defined curve there. And I know this is also a curve. So instead of, okay, so like a bad example of tracing, I'll do it here, would be to literally do like line art on top of the image. This is wrong. This is correct. You need to shape again, look at the shape as opposed to the edge. So if we just now if we take away our image, we can see the trace that we have left. And in fact, what a lot of people recommend is once you've figured this out, once you figured out the body shape and kind of like where everything's supposed to go, you can actually just replicate it over here. You can replicate the image by yourself, because your motion has kind of already, like, you've already kind of understood the basic principles of drawing the image from the tracing. So theoretically, you should be able to also draw the same image again. Obviously, maybe not And yeah, so as you can see, you can kind of learn and understand how the body is shaped. Obviously, I made a little bit of a mistake here, but you can kind of understand how the body is shaped and the shapes that form it by tracing it, and then transferring that over to your own sketch that you didn't do from tracing. And you can see how it kind of becomes like, not muscle memory, that's the wrong word, but it kind of, you can kind of start to understand how these shapes fit together to create the image. And through that, you learn how to draw, kind of. Or you learn how anatomy, or like how certain structures are created and how they look. Alright, so now I'm going to show you guys an example of supportive referencing. And so this is when you use an image. So in my situation, I have found this image of this girl that I really like. I like the way that it's structured. I'm not going to go into shading or coloring. So we'll just focus on like the basic sketch. And I really like how her features are sharp and the composition is nice. So I'm going to draw probably like maybe like half her body or something. So once you've gotten your reference, you can start sketching, and it's important to kind of like study the shape. Again, as you can see, like the head, I can kind of, and then like trace out kind of like where her head will be. And also, just like a disclaimer, I'm not going to be tracing this like exactly like the image. It's going to be more of a take of it in my style, because I think that is something really important to keep in mind. Unless, of course, you're doing realism, then, of course, it's very important to, capture the subject as close to what it looks like as possible. But for this situation, I think it's important to kind of like draw it in your own style. Right. So as you can see, I've traced out, or I have used this image as a reference to create like my own version of it. But of course, when I am sketching it, I'm not completely tracing it. I'm just using it as kind of a guideline. So I've studied the way that her hair is. I've studied her face structure a little bit, and I can see that, you know, like she has these like cheeks that kind of like pop out a little bit, and like, so that's like a defining characteristic. I have seen like the way that her hair flows, and you kind of use that as well. So you can see it kind of goes into a little bit of like a knot, so you use that hairstyle. And I've also referenced her clothing, but I've also made it my own because I've done it in my style. So I think that's something important to keep in mind, is that when you use an image like this as a reference, it's really, really important to change it. Of course you should be inspired by it, copy it. Not copy it, but like understand the anatomy. But at the same time, when you're using it as a support reference, don't rely entirely on the image. You also have to kind of add your own creativity to it. Another way of thinking about it is that you can actually add multiple different references or multiple different styles into the one artwork that you make. Because if you're copying or if you're referencing from multiple different sources and multiple different artists or photos or whatever you're referencing from, that taking a little piece from each and making it and combining it into your own creates an original work. Because you know, you're not just directly copying something, you're like adding something from another reference into it, and that creates an entirely new kind of concept. And of course, when you're drawing it, your own art making is going to kind of like make its way in there, and it's going to become kind of an original work. So yeah, that is kind of my explanation on referencing. I hope that was helpful and kind of helped you understand a little bit into what you should do, what kind of references you should use, and like what you shouldn't be doing with references particularly.